Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me make sure my mic is up, make sure everything is good. Hope everyone is doing okay today. Level's good and the other part is good. Perfect. Yeah, hope everyone's doing okay today. It's 3 p.m. on a Thursday, over the hump, going into Friday and weekend. So, the conversation with Elizabeth Voss went extremely well yesterday. And one of the things she talked about was, of course, Julian Assange. That's why I brought her on the show. But specifically, what's taking place with him now? There seems to be this new coordinated strategy, this kind of almost conspiracy theory, in order to create this pretext in order to evict Julian Assange out of that embassy. It's nonsense. And it's sad that The Guardian is doing this. The Guardian is one of those papers that I've used on multiple accounts because some of their work is really good, but this is nonsense. A secret anonymous source told me this, so here's the information that we're putting out. We're stenographers. Rafael Correa, he was the previous Ecuadorian president, comes out and says, this is nonsense. Says this is nonsense. Before I get to that, though, there's something else in the story I want to talk about. Do you remember this? Aaron Matei has a conversation with a guy who wrote a book talking about Russian collusion. Aaron Matei, I'm sorry, somebody's in my earshot. Do you remember when Lawrence O'Donnell flipped out? There's a video with Lawrence O'Donnell flipping out. And he's like, shut off the fucking microphone, or shut off the goddamn noise, stop the goddamn breaking. He's like screaming at the top of his lungs. And somebody leaks the video of him raging out for like 10 minutes. That person gets fired. He comes out and apologizes for raging out. When I do the show, I understand where he's coming from. It is aggravating. It's like all of you is infused in doing a very specific thing. So all of your concentration is kind of on this one thing. And it's almost like you're plugged into something. It's almost like a channel or something. I am not, reading something off of a pad. So all of the stuff is kind of coming out in the way that it comes out. It's just a bunch of information jumbled. I have a very specific thing that I want to talk about. And this stuff just kind of falls out. When something else breaks into your earshot, it snaps the circuit in two. And there's always like this break. What Lawrence O'Donnell is talking about is he has this audience of millions, apparently, or thousands, how many ever he gets. And he doesn't want to look like an asshole on television. So the practice face and the persona and the way that he goes, his cadence, all those things are practiced because those are his safest positions. That is the safest disposition that he's willing to show to the American audience or to the audience in general. It's like your ascendant in astrology. It's the thing that you're willing to show. He doesn't want that to break. It takes a certain amount of concentration, I would imagine, to keep that up and to be able to kind of just go from item to item to item to item. And again, to not look like an asshole. The reason I say that, there's other parts where he's talked about stuff where he flipped out saying, I told you guys to remove it because now I'm going to look like an asshole and people are going to attack me for this. My point is, when stuff gets into your earshot, it is like, it does jar you, it does screw you up. So I understand where he's coming from. He shouldn't rage out. That's a fucking horrible response, but I'm saying, I understand where he's coming from. I'm sorry for the diversion or the tangent. Aaron Matei having a conversation with a guy who wrote the book called Collusion. Aaron Matei eviscerates this guy. This was big news that Aaron Matei eviscerated this guy because this was one of those main proponents of the Russia stuff nonsense, collusion nonsense, and he wrote a book on it. So certainly the guy who wrote the book on it can withstand a withering cross-examination by Aaron Matei, and that came out to be not so much. He could not. Look at this one very specific part, however, because this sums up the Russia stuff, and it's hilarious to me. I always laugh at this particular part.
Okay, well, listen, in terms of the book, I do want to quote you one part that I did read that I found interesting, which is where you are talking about the potential connections between Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager, and the Russian government. And so you spoke to a Manafort associate. Hopefully I have his name, hopefully I can pronounce his name properly, Konstantin Kilimnik. And Kilimnik wrote you by email in response to your questions about his relationship with Manafort. And you recount that Klimnik responded by telling you that the inclusion issue was gibberish, and then he signed his email off with by saying "off to collect my paycheck at KGB," and then he has an emoji smiley face with 2 parentheses. Okay, and you write, "The thing which gave me pause was Klimnik's use of smiley faces. True, Russians are big emoticon fans, but I've seen something similar before. In 2013, the Russian diplomat in charge of political influence operations in London was named Sergei Nalobin. Nalobin had close links with Russian intelligence. He was the son of a KGB general. His brother worked for the FSB. Nalobin looked like a career foreign intelligence officer." And you go on to write, "On his Twitter feed, Nalobin described himself thus: a brutal agent of the Putin dictatorship. Smiley face." So are you inferring there that because 2 Russians used a smiley face, that's proof that Manafort's associate was a tool of the Russian government?
No, I mean, really what you're doing is now rather a sort of silly exercise. You haven't read the book, but you're taking one small bit and jumping on that.
Because you're using emoticons as proof of a Russian tie, so I'm asking you about it.
If you let me...
Okay, please, yeah.
Your kind of question, and maybe you could read the rest of the book when you finish the interview. But, I mean, this is, Klimnik is the guy that Paul Manafort last summer emailed about trying to set up a kind of private briefing. This is when Manafort is still Trump's campaign manager for a very famous oligarch called Oleg Deripaska. Now Deripaska more or less sort of sits at the right hand of Putin. He certainly has very close relations with him. And I think it's perfectly kind of legitimate to ask what kind of Klimnik role Klimnik was playing. I emailed him. We're in kind of correspondence. He's still in contact, by the way, with Paul Manafort. Was emailing him a couple of weeks ago. Manafort I met. I mean, there's a whole chapter about what he was doing in Ukraine, about his work for Viktor Yanukovych, about how Yanukovych became a kind of, kleptocrat, and he's now been indicted with money laundering, with conspiracy against the U.S. by Robert Mueller. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to look at him. And
I'm not saying, Luke, I'm not saying it's not legitimate. I'm taking issue with you writing, "The thing which gave me pause was Klimnik's use of smiley faces," as if the use of smiley faces is somehow evidence of a nefarious Russian government tie. And by the way, let me ask you about Manafort. What was Manafort doing in Ukraine? Because as I think you even acknowledge in the book, again, because I did read through it, you even acknowledge in the book that Manafort was not even trying to steer Yanukovych towards a pro-Kremlin policy. I mean, that's widely reported, that he actually was trying to orient Yanukovych towards the West.
Luke Harding. That's Luke Harding. The one that's getting completely dismantled by Aaron Maté is Luke Harding. Now, the reason I'm showing this clip, because this is the guy who's screaming at the top of his lungs while Russia meddling, is so infuriated by this guy got to write a fucking book on Donald Trump and Russia. And he does write that book, and in no way can he defend his position that there's something there. And in one case, even resorting to emoticons and smiley faces to try to make some kind of point. That guy, Luke Harding, is one of the people that are connected to the article written by The Guardian as they put a knife in Julian Assange. That guy. The guy using emoticons. That guy, Luke Harding. I read this and I thought to myself, this is nonsense. The way they're using words and the way they're describing things it's inflammatory, but it's inflammatory in a way to essentially put a knife in Assange. It makes this look bad, as opposed to when you actually look at it from a practical standpoint. What they're saying is nonsense. It's just the way they're using to describe these particular activities. So I'm going to read the first part so you can kind of get the feel for what they're saying. And then I'm going to go to what the president is saying of Ecuador, who explains it. Because The Guardian had never actually waited for a response from the Ecuadorian president or prior Ecuadorian president before running this piece, as if they didn't even want his response because they wanted the sensational scene or sensational article. Ecuador bankrolled a multi-million-dollar spy operation to protect and support Julian Assange in his central London embassy. Right here, even this. Bankrolled a multi-million-dollar spy operation to protect and support Julian Assange in his central London embassy, employing an international security company and undercover agents to monitor the visitors, embassy, and staff, and even the British police, according to the document seen by The Guardian. Just right there by itself. So, I want to introduce you to someone else. This is the president of Ecuador, or the prior president of Ecuador. And actually, before I get to him, I want to get to the journal, to the Intercept. A journalist, Glenn Greenwald, actually went to the prior president of Ecuador and asked him about this and said, hey, this is what The Guardian was saying. What's actually true? Seeing as you were there, you're the one who approved his asylum. What was actually true? Before we go to the president, I want to introduce you to him. This is the president of the prior president of Ecuador. Listen to what he's saying. I'm going to only show this for 2 minutes, but there's something very specific that comes across from the standpoint of him that is not necessarily in the person who's taking over after him. Meaning, what Assange is going through, he may be going through difficult periods. Let's say it that way, because the new president does not have the resolve to maintain the integrity of Ecuador in the same way the old president did. This is the prior president that Glenn Greenwald talked to.
To risk. According to the media, one of the reasons for the delay in granting him asylum was Ecuador's fear of a possible US response. Is this true?
Not at all. We just wanted to address the request in a very thorough and responsible way. We looked at the motivations for Mr. Assange's asylum bid. We looked into the charges brought against him in Sweden, reviewed UK law as well as international law, and of course we went over our own legislation. Then we made a responsible decision, just as we promised originally, after the Olympics, specifically because they were taking place in London, and not because of fear of reprisals, which we know might follow. We will always be guided by
principles and values, not fear.
What consequences might Ecuador face after granting asylum to Julian Assange?
Normally, such a decision shouldn't have any consequences. That is, if all countries respect international law, which clearly says that a state has the right to grant asylum. How many times has Sweden granted asylum? A lot of people requested asylum in Sweden and live there now. This country is known for its willingness to give asylum. What consequences could there be? But unfortunately, in this particular case, we see that some countries are displaying their colonial and imperial ambitions, their ethnocentricity. It turns out that if Ecuador grants asylum to someone, it suddenly might have consequences. What consequences are we talking about if we're exercising our sovereignty in line with international law?
Are you afraid of any sanctions that might follow?
Right there. I love that line. If we're exercising our sovereignty, and then he even makes this point of saying some countries are going back to their colonial roots, like their colonialism. Oftentimes when you're talking about like Western countries, when Europe is talking about Europe or Europe is talking about America, we don't use the term colonialism. He does. And he's making this point of the integrity of Ecuador is going to be maintained. This was the president that got rid of the United States military base from Ecuador. And in getting rid of the bases is, look, I'll be fair. If you allow us to put a military base in Miami, you can put your military base in Ecuador, in which case the United States said you're not putting a military base in Miami, in which case he said you're not putting your military base in Ecuador. This guy was the one that was there trying to protect Assange. The person who's in there now, not so much. The person who's in there now has just signed a deal with the United States, reaffirming a kind of military partnership between the two. Military bases are not necessarily supposed to be a part of that particular deal, at least not that's being exposed. But the countries are coming back into a kind of alignment between each other. Now, the catch is the reason why the previous president was against that is because he wanted to maintain the integrity of Ecuador. And he doesn't necessarily want to go back to this thing where the United States just run roughshod over South America. Well, the new president is not necessarily taking that tact. So let's read the article by Greenwald, because the article is really, really good. And in fact, I also kind of want to read part of the one from World Socialist website because I like the way they put it. So let me do theirs first, and then let me hit Greenwald. Conspiracy emerges to push Julian Assange into British and United States hands. I'm not going to read the totality of this. I just want to read the first part because I think they frame it. I like their framing. Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder who provided the world's people with truth and the United States war crimes in the Middle East and many of the Washington coups and regime-changing intrigues around the globe, is in escalating danger. Moves are afoot to force Assange out of Ecuador London embassy, where he sought political asylum close to 6 years ago and has been forced to live as an effective prisoner. If he's taken into custody by British authorities, he faces being handed over to the United States government, which has long sought to place him on trial on espionage charges that potentially carry the death sentence. The British newspaper The Guardian originally published some of the WikiLeaks' devastating exposures in 2010. It then turned viciously against him, along with international news outlets. Now, it has instigated a foul campaign clearly acting in league with the various intelligence agencies to justify Ecuador's reneging on Assange's asylum. The fresh offensive against Assange comes 7 weeks after the Ecuadorian government, under pressure from the United States, Britain, and other powers, cut off Assange's entire internet and phone contact with the outside world and blocked his friends and supporters from visiting him. The Guardian published unsubstantiated allegations that Assange violated embassy communication systems and apparently read confidential diplomatic traffic. In a tweet, WikiLeaks emphatically denied the accusation and pointed to the source, saying that's an anonymous libel aligned with the current UK and United States government onslaught against Mr. Assange's asylum while he can't respond. Now, understand the ridiculousness of this. We don't know who the anonymous source is. The anonymous source can be some British cat. It can be some British diplomat. It could be some American, CIA agent that's whispering into the ear of some reporter. You have no idea. And do you honestly believe that all of these people are honest and noble actors? I don't have that belief at all. Assange has made a lot of enemies, but he's made a lot of enemies for essentially being an advocate for truth. A bunch of Hillary supporters angry at Assange, tweeting to Luke Harding. So now I want to go to Julian Assange, because Assange gets into the reality of this. Not Assange, I mean, Glenn Greenwald. Ecuador ex-president Rafael Correa denounces the treatment of Julian Assange as torture. From the start, Ecuador told both the UK and the Swedish governments that it would immediately send Assange to Stockholm in exchange for a pledge from Sweden not to use that as a pretext to extradite him to the United States, something the Swedish government had the power to do but refused. Essentially saying, look, he will come to face those bogus charges if you just promise not to extradite him to the United States. Sweden is like, yeah, we're not going to make that promise. Correa has also emphasized that Ecuador from the start told Swedish investigators that they are welcome to interrogate Assange in their embassy, but almost 5 years elapsed before Swedish prosecutors in 2016 finally did so. Citing those facts, a UN panel ruled in 2016 that the actions of the UK government constituted arbitrary detention and violation of Assange's fundamental human rights, a decision British officials quickly said they intended to ignore. Despite the fact that Swedish prosecutors dropped his sex crimes instigations last May, not because they concluded Assange was innocent, but because they believed further efforts to bring him to Sweden were futile, UK authorities have vowed to arrest him on what they claim as bail violations. Bail violations. They're using bail violations. The danger for Assange thus remains high if he were to leave the embassy, particularly in light of the highly threatening speech given last year by Mike Pompeo, then U.S. President Donald Trump, CIA director, and now his Secretary of State, in which he labeled WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service, denied that the publications of the document is protected by the First Amendment, and vowed to give them the space to crush us with misappropriated secrets is a perversion of what our great Constitution stands for. It ends now. It ends now because they're in office and they don't want the nasty, disgusting shit that Donald Trump is going to do in that office to be exposed to the public. That's what it boils down to. So, right here. Let's start right here. Correa cited those facts as well as Ecuador's legal obligation under international law to asylees. to denounce Ecuador's denial of visitors to Assange as basic torture. Denial of visitors is, Correa said, a clear violation of the rights. Once we give asylum to someone, we are responsible for his safety, for ensuring humane living conditions. But without communications to the outside world and visits from anyone, the government is basically attacking Julian Assange's health. The ex-president said he believed it could be appropriate to limit Assange's communications if he were acting irresponsibly by interfering with another country's politics. During the 2016 U.S. election, Correa said his government told Assange that it thought his attacks on Hillary Clinton were becoming excessive and briefly suspended his internet communications and underlined his concerns. But that was just temporary, he said. We never intended to take away the internet for an extended period of time. That is going way too far. Now, let's see. Right here. Earlier this month, Correa's successor, the current Ecuadorian president, Lenin Moreno, announced that he had recently signed an agreement focused on security cooperation with the United States, which implies the sharing of information, intelligence, topics, and experience in the fight against illegal drug trafficking and fighting transnational organized crime. Many in Ecuador view that as a prelude to return to the days when the United States dominated Ecuador, including with new military bases, a suspicion Moreno's government denies. But to Correa, Moreno is returning Ecuador to the days when it was subservient to the dictates of the United States government. Everyone in Latin America knows what this agreement with the United States means: control, intervention, spying, he said. Given the submissive posture of the current Ecuadorian president, Correa said it would not shock him if they submitted to American and British demands regarding Assange. Correa also cited that Moreno's government recent decision to terminate peace talks between the Colombian government and rebels on the Ecuadorian soil, which is the ex-president believes was done at the behest of the United States. As for the spying allegations, in the Guardian article, Correa said that the newspaper took the customary and standard security arrangement and tried to make it appear sinister and scandalous. Of course, we provided security for Assange in the embassy, Correa said. It was our duty under law to do so. We had the UK government threatening to break into the embassy. We spent a small amount of money to provide security. Correa said that unlike the United States, which surrounds its embassies with massive military protection, Ecuador does not have the means to do that. So we have special security needs. We hire private firms to do it. There's nothing unusual about this. It would have been in violation of our duties if we did not. Correa said that the government hired a well-known security firm based in Spain, UC Global, to provide those services, but the current government replaced it with an Israeli firm. But those services are still being provided by the current government, Correa said. As for the Guardian's claim that Assange himself breached Ecuadorian cybersecurity systems to read emails and documents from the Ecuadorian officials, Correa said that claim seems absurd, adding that the Guardian presented no evidence for this, just anonymous source. Conceding that it was possible that Assange had managed to hack into the various government systems, he emphasized that he had no knowledge that such spying had taken place, nor had seen any evidence. The former president stressed that he had been given virtually no chance to respond to the Guardian's allegations before publication of this article. They sent it to someone's email address in Ecuador very shortly before they published the story, said Correa, who is currently in Belgium. I did not see the email until after the story was published. They seem to want to make a sensationalized story, not any serious report to find out the truth, he said. Correa said he would provide the intercept with the email sent by the Guardian upon receipt from Correa. This article will be updated to provide it. But now that Assange's asylum, Correa is adamant that the current government is bound by domestic and international law to protect his well-being and safety. Correa was scathing in the denunciation of the treatment of Assange and currently viewing it as a byproduct of Moreno's inability or unwillingness to have Ecuador act like a sovereign and independent country. The ex-president also said in Brazilian media that the new president may hand Assange over. So, I think that was in World Socialist website. Look, right here. And this will be the last clip. Talking about John Pilger. Pilger pointed to the accommodation Moreno was seeking with Washington, which has been aggressively moving against the government in Latin America, regarded as an obstacle to U.S. hegemony of the continent. It's quite clear that the government has deferred to the United States because it was cut off Julian's contacts. All internet phone visitors, apart from food and lawyers, on the day that the United States Southcom Deputy Commander Joseph DeSalvo arrived in Quito, Ecuador to renegotiate the U.S. base that Correa has shut down. The Guardian based its unverified accusations against Julian Assange on secret records it had seen, together with Focus Ecuador, a right-wing website. It charged that Ecuador's intelligence agency bankrolled a multi-million-dollar spy agency to protect Assange's embassy over 6 years. The activity cost $5 million. Okay, my point is, the previous president said, well, yeah, because Britain was talking about invading the embassy, and like anybody else, we would actually protect our embassy. This wasn't a quote-unquote spy ring. It was a security service that was protecting the person who we gave asylum to. It's amazing that the Guardian did this. It's amazing that the Guardian did this. It is a low bar to which they stooped. I'll put it that way. And some of the people that they were using to make these accusations. It's like, do you know people? This guy has enemies. Yes. How are you vetting the people who are giving you this information? And why don't those people want to be verified as they put a knife into them? And doesn't the Guardian care about what's being published on their newspaper, especially when it's just unverified sources? We're just saying this and not even waiting for information to come back from the person who would know, meaning the prior president of Ecuador, who they essentially didn't wait to publish their piece, didn't wait for a comment. It's amazing. It's amazing. The idea that Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy hacked into, it's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. Like it's absurd on its face. And yet they print this out, and nobody who's writing this says, wait a minute, it sounds kind of insane. The guy's locked in the embassy and he's hacking stuff as he's locked in the embassy. Yeah, fuck it. Let's write it anyway. It's nonsense. It's utter nonsense. I read that article and I thought to myself, this is the worst bit of journalism. I don't even think you can call it journalism. It amounts to just a hit piece on Julian Assange. You ratchet all of this up, is what the World Socialist website was kind of making the point of saying. If you put all of this together, this looks like a coordinated attack on trying to get Assange out that embassy. So you come up with a pretext. Assange hacked Ecuador. Now you have a new president who's aligned with the United States. That president is under certain diplomatic ties to say, okay, we've given this guy diplomatic immunity as a country, not as an individual. And we need to live up to our obligation with the diplomatic community. How do we get his ass out that embassy now that we're in some kind of security operation with the United States? I know. What if we whisper to some hack's ear that Julian Assange hacked into the Ecuadorian embassy? That's an idea. That's an awesome idea. Hey, but you can't tell who I am, but I'm whispering in your ear. And now that person whispered in your ear, maybe the person who's writing this is kind of pissed off that Hillary Clinton lost. Maybe he's not pissed off. Maybe he just wants a story that's sensationalized. But either way, he comes out and says, we have an anonymous source that Julian Assange, as he's in his little embassy, has hacked into the Ecuadorian embassy. That's nonsense. It's nonsense. You would think that someone would say, this sounds a little dicey, but okay. But okay. They print it anyway. They print it anyway. Joshua Renshaw, please enter me in the Jamal t-shirt contest where the loser gets a Progressive Voice t-shirt. Oh, jeez. Joshua, I also wanted to point out that Bob Ramirez is an anagram for R.A. Bieber's mom. Just saying. Just saying. Oh, man, Bob. Joshua, the U.S. military bases all over the world because we're generous. Ecuador has 0 military bases over the United States. They have no room to talk. Hashtag selfish. Oh, oh, that's hilarious. Baltazar, he's trying to go after you, man. He's trying to take your shtick. And you know what? That's wild. I loved I loved what he said, the previous president. If they let us put a base in Florida, then fine. You can have your base in Quito. The United States was like, we're not letting you put no base in our country. Fuck that. We don't allow countries to put bases here. He's like, well, fine. Same thing here. If I'm not mistaken, the Ecuadorian constitution also does not allow military bases on their soil. I think it even says they're a peaceful country, but they don't allow it on their soil. Something to that effect. So, yeah. Jim Hyde, Jamal equals true brain of the United States. Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. I don't think it's the true brain of the United States. I just think it's looking at it and saying, what are the motivations of the people involved? Meaning, what do they want? People, look, here's the honest thing of looking at American politics. Integrity doesn't apply. Has nothing to do with the process. Values don't apply. Has nothing to do with the process. The values for the political people are just those things that they have to deal with because other people believe they have them. Meaning it's the thing they have to kind of slosh their way through. It's not necessarily something that they hold per se, at least not most of them. Usually it's, what do I want to accomplish? What do I have at my disposal to accomplish it? Am I black, white, Hispanic? Do I have a lot of cash? Don't I have a lot of cash? Or what positions do I need to take? Do I need to like guns? Do I need to hate guns? What cultural stuff do I need to appropriate? Do I need to have hot sauce in my pocket? What did Kamala Harris say? She kept like a Hebrew Bible or something in her pocket, some weird, when she was talking to AIPAC. If you take out the value stuff, and if you don't think of it from the standpoint of, well, that's not fair, that's not right, doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. What do these people want to accomplish? And they do whatever they need to do to accomplish it. They may take a pretext, or they may take a disposition, because most people don't function that way. Meaning most people that you bump into around in the public itself, they may function that way on a lower emotional level, but they can't get away with that on a grand scale. They don't, so they don't function that way. Just from a social thing, our interactions, we have a certain amount of trust in interactions with the way we go about our affairs in normal everyday life. It is hard for us to believe that political people function that way because we ourselves don't particularly function that way. Disabuse yourself of that. They are not the same. They do not function in the same way we function on this. That is the hardest thing to get across. When somebody is on your wavelength, you look at that person, you're like, yeah, I'm feeling that person, I'm digging that person. And you're making this assumption that what that person is saying is right. So if you're a Democrat, what Obama says is right. If you're a Republican, what Trump is saying is right. You give them a certain amount of leeway, you give them a certain amount of benefit of the doubt. That's where you fail, and that's where you fuck up. You should not. They're political actors. They do what they need to do for the disposition, or for the people who they've aggregated around as their political base and their political power. And oftentimes, the people in those political parties, especially if cash is a part of the process, they are functioning on a different thing. The pretext that they're functioning on is cash. I need cash. I need as much money as I can get. However, I can't allow the public to know that. I can't allow the public to believe that. Meaning, I need to take these dispositions of hope and change and this other stuff because I can't allow the public to believe I'm just this kind of vacuous corporate tool. No, I can't allow the public to believe that. If I need to do incremental stuff on the sides, then I'm going to do incremental stuff on the sides to make the public believe I'm on their side. But ultimately, the totality of me, or the overwhelming part of me, is going to be in the interest of who's paying me. People grow up believing they're Democrats, or grow up believing they're Republicans, not realizing that both of these parties essentially function at the behest of the cash that's putting money in both of their pockets. Both of them are functioning at the behest of the same people. What people call dispositions in political parties are these minute differences. One side is just a little bit less rapacious than the other side. That's it. Nothing changes. This remains status quo. Your incremental changes may be allowed depending on the person who you put in, but ultimately the fundamental system itself remains the way it is. Cash continues to get accrued to one side of the distribution scale. Everybody else's life gets a little bit more harder as on a hamster wheel. It needs the fundamental change. And you're not going to get it in the way the parties are. I think these people are psychopaths. And I honestly believe that. It's hard, like, do you know millions of people still don't have health care? And the Democratic Party ran on this thing as if, you know, this is universal health care. It's not universal health care. There's still millions that die without it, or thousands that die without it every day. We can have different changes. We can have a different country. Sorry, I'm getting stepped up. We can have a different country. I'm just saying, the people who are making these choices. These are not, they don't function in the same scale. The scales they're functioning on are grand. They're much more epic. The incentive structure that's built into those things is much more intense and much more strident. We don't necessarily function on incentives in the way that they function on incentives. Now, that's not saying they're different. Yeah, I still think they're robots. If you put one of us in the same positions that they're in, some of us will be able to deal with it. Some of us would become those same corporatist, pricks out there that we are right here decrying. Look, all I'm saying, this is a lot of what the chop. We should not assume that the way people in power function is the same way that we function as we interact in our normal affairs. And I don't mean that to be, I'm saying that badly, and I'm saying it extremely poorly. I think what I'm trying to get at, human beings are human beings. There's certain motivations that prod and push us into certain behaviors. And there's certain ways we get of looking at the world that we gotta get ensconced into, where we have a hard time even seeing that there's other worlds that other people inhabit. I'm making the point that they inhabit a different world than us. They look at us and they look at the world in different ways than we do. And to not mistaken our value system for theirs. That's the point I'm getting at. They're not the same. They're not the same at all. Let's see. Jamal is the brain we need. Jake Tapper is the brain we deserve. That's funny. The brain we deserve or the brain we need. Look, it's not. I think, honestly, if you threw a rock and just at a random person, and you ask that person, look, do you really want us over there killing other people abroad? That person will say no. And I don't mean explain like policy to him and explain how the world is set up, how it's arranged, how cash is in the system, how the money gets accrued to the top, how certain policies, how their states gives all this money to corporations and everything else, how the government and our world could be arranged in a way that people had the things that they need to go about their affairs, but we're just so happy to be arranged in this way. That the world can be arranged in any particular way you want, and get them to see that and understand that ultimately all of this stuff is a thing of policy and a thing of choice. It's choice. The power and the failing, our heaven and hell, our decision space. And you were honest with them. Like, no bullshit. Like not, like you weren't trying to give them a narrative. You weren't trying to give them a line. You weren't trying to give him to, like you just gave him, yes, some of our tax dollars are going over to pay terrorists because Obama wanted to take down that government. And yeah, Trump is giving money to neo-Nazis in the Ukraine to take down the Russian government. And you're just honest. This is the bare bones of what it is. You may give him his reasons that these people are doing it, but you're not giving him spin. You're not being a Democrat. You're not being a Republican. You're not being anything. You're being a goddamn human being saying, this is what is taking place in the world. Do you approve? Yes or no? I would wager that this is not the far end of the sandbox. I would wager that a lot of those people would say, yeah, I kind of don't want our money going to that. I don't necessarily want us doing that. I don't like this idea of us trying to instigate that. No, I don't like us spending $8 trillion on a war. Yes, I would have preferred that $8 trillion to be spent here at home building infrastructure. Yes, I want my fucking flying car. I want the train that goes on this hypersonic thing from, Washington to California in an hour. I want those things. And I can't have those things if our government is spending trillions of dollars murdering and killing other people abroad. I think if you describe both worlds to him, I wager that he would choose a world that looked more like ours. That's not what the public gets. The public gets Jake Tapper. The public gets Chuck Todd. These people who are oblivious and who are stenographers. That's what the public gets. So it's hard for me to blame the public on this because these people are just trying to live their lives. This is the shit that they see. This is the shit that they're ensconced with. And these guys honestly believe that the people of these parties are trying to work at their behest. You have a lot of Democrats who believe it. They're insane. It's already been proven that WikiLeaks often edits emails in batches that they release for political effect. Nothing that WikiLeaks has ever put out has been proven to be false. Nothing. Nothing at all. Actually, no. No, Joe, it's been proven that every document ever released from WikiLeaks is 100% authentic and not altered. Exactly. Exactly. Baltazar, Hillary is motivated by three things: a shit ton of money, a fuck ton of money, and a possibility of murder. What? A fuck ton of money. There's a, I think it was, oh, who was it? Daily Show. I think it was the Daily Show, where they said something to the effect of, Obama ran on hope and a lot of money or something like that. Oh, I know what it was. Obama just bought a brand new helicopter. It runs on hope and a lot of money. Oh man, it's so hilarious. So hilarious. You are grossly misusing the word edit, Joshua Renshaw. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. I would say point to one document out of all the documents, the voluminous documents that WikiLeaks has put out. Point to one that's been wrong. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Animax, I think it's not really ideology, but bad people in general. There is a process that normal people become elitists, and we should look closely at that process. Yeah, it's called being born into something and believing that you yourself did this. It's like I suspect this has something to do with human psychology and the system itself. Like, there was this game where they would give people money if they play Monopoly. And even though they would give some people much more money, and those people cognitively know that they're playing a game and they started the game with much more money, they would become pricks as the game went on. They would become jerks. They would become assholes. Now, imagine for the moment you were born in a situation where all of your needs were always met. You always went on the best flights. You always had the best food. You always had people servicing you. Imagine this was your reality, where you yourself kind of walked on an air that was just above everybody else. Would you get into your head this weird belief that you were somehow better? Now imagine if you were in the political space where you made decisions constantly, where you feel like, I'm so bright, I'm so smart, I can play politics with the world, so I can invade this country and I can move the pieces around this country, as if these aren't real people. Because let's be honest, the decisions that the policymakers make, they themselves, it's not somebody coming and putting a bullet in their heads or somebody chopping their heads off. If it was, maybe they would make different choices. They make choices because those choices don't directly affect them. George Bush can invade a country and kill 1 million people because there was no way for Iraq to actually get his weapons here to go after and put a bullet in George Bush. It doesn't affect them. They can be as unempathetic as they want to be because it doesn't affect them. John McCain doesn't like torture very much, but yeah, John McCain wants to murder a bunch of people across the globe. But he's touchy about torture. It's this thing of empathy. Sometimes empathy is one of those things that you get when you actually live through a particular experience and you're able to see the people around you and get across, oh wow, I've understood this experience from this particular disposition and now I can be someone empathetic towards this position. If you're a rich plutocratic fuck that never necessarily had to work a day in your life, you probably don't have that. So, yeah. Trudy, the exceptions being born rich and feeling entitled are very rare, like FDR. It happens, but yeah, it's rare. I think it's one of those things you have to get past. And I've heard the FDR thing, he was ill when he was a kid or something. I don't know, man. MSNBC totally doesn't edit material for their political purposes. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. Data Lord de la Terra. WikiLeaks couldn't possibly fabricate many of the leaks. Gasp was confirmed officially. No. She got through the, well, I don't know. I mean, they said she could have been confirmed today. But she made it through the hearing. And they were talking about her having potentially enough votes to get confirmed. I'll check on it after the show, but they were saying she could be confirmed as early as today. So, all right, guys. I'm going to go check that out because you've kind of brought that up and I'm curious about it now. Julian Assange is a fucking patriot. Just because something is against the law, just because the government or the law doesn't necessarily like something, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. The law is not real. It's a figment of our imagination. It can be changed at a whim. It's someone with a bat, someone with a stick, someone with a gun telling you that you need to behave a particular way. It has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with what's right. I would make the point to you that there is a such thing as what's best from the disposition of the people of the societies themselves. WikiLeaks, real journalism, this idea of understanding the forces at work that's in your government and what those forces are doing. How can you keep control of your government if you don't know what your government is doing? That's what it fundamentally boils down to. We need to have far more transparency in our government, and the fact that we need something like a WikiLeaks is sad because it means that the regular, real journalists aren't doing their jobs. Good job, Jake Tapper, in failing at what you do. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I don't like CNN. CNN's trash. CNN's trash. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys. And by the way, Joshua, thank you very much. Jim Hayden. Yeah, Joshua Renshaw, Jim Hayden. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. All right, guys. I'll see you shortly.